Hello everybody and welcome to another edition of the Conscious Change Agent web show. Thanks for joining us. I'm your host, Jack Butler. And the Conscious Change Agent web show is where we bring you conscious change agents, people who are mastering this paradigm of inner work and outer change, and give them a platform to share their wisdom. I'm excited to have my guest today, Joe Kittel. I'm going to give you a bit of a background on Joe's rather impressive resume. Joe worked in the field of, or has been working in the field of strategic alliances for 20 years, over 20 years. And for 16 of these years, he actually led strategic alliances at Hewlett-Packard. For 10 years, Joe's been focused on the practical application of spirituality to help strategic alliance managers increase their value-creating effectiveness. He was a pre-founding member of the board of the Association of Strategic Alliance Professionals, assisting in its early definition. In '97, Joe helped establish HP's corporate-level strategic alliance with Microsoft, leading corporate-wide initiatives and negotiations in some of the most strategically contentious areas. At the conclusion of his career at HP in 2005, Joe established the first strategic alliance between HP's printing business and SAP in a deal valued in excess of $200 million. In college, Joe graduated magna cum laude in electrical engineering from the University of Utah, focusing on quantum electronics. Joe describes his two spiritual universities as coping with addiction and dealing with the progressive neuromuscular disability Friedreich's ataxia in two of his children, two topics that we're going to come on to in this show. And he recently published the book, Spiritual Principles in Strategic Alliances, Transforming the Status Quo Mediocrity into Greatness, which has been critically acclaimed and includes some pretty cool endorsements, including Raj Sisodia, who's prominent in the conscious capitalism movement. So, Joe, great to have you on the show.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Yeah. So let's kind of take a little step back. I'm always curious to see kind of what have been formative influences on people. So, tell me a little bit about old Joe. So, Joe in the early stages, maybe at HP.
So it's okay to swear on this show?
I don't know. Let's see. Yeah, we can edit that. Yeah, no, it's fine. Let's go for it.
A few words, because they need to be said. So one of them was I was leading some negotiations with IBM.
Yes.
At the time, and two things had happened. One is I was doing a presentation, and somebody said I was so intense they thought I would die from a heart attack in the middle of the presentation. So very, very intense, very much a driver, and I think this comes from my upbringing as a competitive swimmer and being the youngest of four boys. So just feeling like competition and kicking ass was important and needed to be done for the sake of the world. And after one especially challenging negotiation, we were walking down the hall and a coworker said, "Man, you should have a business card that says asshole negotiator." And I thought about that, and I thought, that would be good.
I like that, yeah.
And then I thought, even in negotiating, at the time I was an intense negotiator. And I said, I don't think I'd want to do that because you don't want to let the other side know how experienced you are in negotiating if you're going to kick their ass. So I thought, no, I won't have that. Yeah.
Huh.
So that was the old Joe. And I would also say it really ties back to my experience in drug addiction, where what kept me in active addiction was two disabilities. I have two spiritual disabilities, and one of them is self-will, thinking I can do this by myself. I can take care of addiction by myself. Thank you. I don't need your help. And the other addiction is at least the illusion of intelligence. I can think my way out of this, and I can do it by myself. And so being not only an asshole negotiator and very competitive, but analyzing things to death and thinking I can do it by myself.
Yeah. So what was the span of that addiction? When did that first really kick in? And how did that play with you leading big level business deals?
Well, I think the addiction really started when I was a teenager and tapping into my dad's alcohol cabinet.
Okay.
And continued through high school and college, and it was, I would characterize my addiction in two ways. One is I'm a high bottom addict, meaning I was able to use drugs and still function in the corporate world.
Okay.
So kind of self-medicating.
Yeah.
I can't remember the other thing. It doesn't come to mind now. I'd relapse. And so it wasn't, I'd go on these binges from time to time.
Okay.
And it may be 3-6 months, maybe a year apart, but eventually I would relapse. And if I got lost control over the self-medicating aspect. But I mean, there are some interesting stories that around my doing strategic alliances. Mm-hmm. And in recovery, we would say these are war stories that don't have much beneficial value.
Huh. Got it.
I would say the first time I met Bill Gates, I was stoned out of my head.
Really?
Which didn't help.
How did it go?
Well, I mean, I think that meeting was okay. Wasn't as good as it could have been.
Yeah.
But I think, the whole HP Microsoft alliance is an interesting topical area. I don't think that one event had that much impact.
Yeah. So what was the turning point for you in terms of, well, both in terms of that addiction and what I would sort of call the formation of New Joe?
So it took, my God, my higher power, he swears at me. And he also uses 2x4s and 4x4s to hit me over the head.
Yep.
Pieces of wood.
Yeah.
British. Okay. Yeah. So, so over a few year period, God said, "Hey, asshole, you want to figure this shit out or die?" And it really does get down to that. Figure it out or die. Figure it out or die. I don't know. I think I can figure it out by myself. Thank you. But so what the turning point? In recovery, we talk about three things when you're telling your story.
Right.
What life is like, what happened,
right,
and then what's life like today. And I think more often than not, people miss that middle point. They gloss over it.
Right.
Oh, I got recovery and got clean. No. Some magic happened there. And you could call it grace, you could call it the love of God, you could call it life conspiring, the universe conspiring on your behalf. But over a few month period, I had a therapist, and I am swearing a lot here, I'll try to cut it down. But he said, he was the best in Colorado in drug addiction. He's a rabbi, in fact, as well. And during one of our sessions, he said, "You're fucked. I don't know what to do with you."
Interesting.
And then I had a sponsor in AA. I was going to both AA and NA. And my sponsor fired me, which doesn't happen.
Really?
It's something that says, and he just said, "You're not willing to listen to what I do. I have other people who want me to help them. And you need to go find another sponsor." And then my wife said, "It's over." Well, basically she said, "You got to leave." And my boss at HP said, "Yeah, I just want to remind you, if you use on company time, it's grounds for termination." So sponsorship fired me. Therapist said I was screwed. Wife said leave. Boss said it could be over. And I'm thinking, maybe there's a message here.
Maybe.
So I went to a drug treatment center, which is a 28-day program, and started practicing simple spiritual principles, which was in AA we talk about, AA and NA we talk about the 11th step being sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God.
Just say that again, just so people catch it.
Sought through prayer. I'm talking a little fast.
That's okay, no.
Sought through prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God.
Okay.
Praying only for knowledge of His will for us and the strength to carry that out. So through treatment, I had that prayer every day, and it was a pretty amazing time to say, "What's your will for me? Give me the strength to carry it out."
Yeah. So how do those flavors play out for you now? You talked about the fact that you came from a sort of place of intellect, strong self-will, competition, like high-level like business negotiations.
Yeah.
Just in sort of succinctly, how's your worldview now shaped around those things?
Well, I look at those things of intellect and self-will and say those are assets. Mm-hmm. They're not necessarily disabilities. I need to use them appropriately. And I seem to be a magnet for intense stuff, for crap, for dealing with issues. I mean, that's what addiction teaches. And then I've got 2 children with a disability. Mm-hmm. That's what their disability is taught. You got to deal with this stuff. And so, but to me, the the flip is, am I doing it all by myself
Yep.
and me against you
Mm-hmm.
to prove to you that I'm better than you?
Mm-hmm.
Or am I doing it in a connected way? Trying to deepen my connection with you and connecting with the spirit within and the universe or higher power around me. To me, that's the pivotal point. Connect or separate.
Yep.
And if I'm connected, go for it with self-will and intellect and intensity. But just don't lose the connection.
Yes. Yeah, it's kind of like using those in service of that connection.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like the right relationship between them.
And it's an interesting balance, because you can get into this rationalization that says, well, I'm doing this for the good of the other person. I'm going to show them all their problems because they need to hear that.
Mm.
So you can rationalize things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And if you don't take time to meditate and connect internally and to say, no, is that really the right thing?
Yeah. So just to round this sort of piece off in terms of you and how you've come to be you, could you just share a little bit about how the experience of the disabilities for your children, how that's shown up for you?
Well, I mean, my oldest son, who died a little over 2 years ago at 33, it's a progressive disability. It's called Friedreich's ataxia. It's a degenerative neuromuscular disorder. So he was losing balance and was stumbling. And at the time, the doctors didn't have a DNA test for it. They could only look at it symptomatically.
Yep.
And they said, well, we don't quite know what it is. It could be your, cerebral palsy. It could be some kind of birth defect. It could be this, could be that. And he was getting worse and worse. And he tried to kill himself. And we had him in the hospital. He had tried to cut himself and overdose on drugs. And we're in the hospital, and he's looking at me saying, I'm ready to move on. He was a junior in high school.
Wow.
I said, and clear-eyed, I don't want to live here anymore. I know the next life's going to be better. I want to die and move on. So, I'm looking at my oldest son eye to eye, and I said, I literally had this pretty intense prayer right then and said, God, I could use some help here. What do I say? And so I told him, and again, I'm going to swear, but I said, if you don't say goodbye, if you do decide to kill yourself and don't say goodbye, I'm going to hunt you down in the hereafter. I'm going to kick your ass. So promise me that you'll say goodbye. And he said, yeah. And then I said to him, maybe you chose to have this disability. I think we are eternal beings. I think we've always existed and we will always exist. And this thought came to me and I just threw it out. I said, maybe you chose to have Friedreich's ataxia. Maybe you sat down with God before you came down here and said, I think that would teach me what I need to learn. And why don't you give me a father who's a drug addict too? That'll be a nice combination for me. God said, sounds like a good idea. And so it was kind of a positive reframe from a higher perspective. Maybe it's a delusional perspective, I don't know. But he didn't kill himself. And, rather than avoiding the fact that he had a disability, we learned to accept it. Mm-hmm. And it's the same theme that goes to recovery from drug addiction or any kind of addiction, or I think any kind of spiritual path, any kind of challenge we're facing. I think the 12 steps could be distilled down to 2 steps. I think it's really talking about acceptance. Saying, because if you can accept that you're an addict, if you can accept that you've got a disability, really accept it, not hide from it, but accept it head on, then it loses its power. Mm-hmm. So I think with acceptance comes transcendence.
Yeah.
If you can then take it the next step, which is to accept it with love, which is embracement. If I can love the fact that I'm an addict, if I can love the fact that my child, next 2 of my children, have this disability, then I transform it.
Yep.
And to me, it's all about light. Because if we shine our light on something, we can clean it up. That's transcendent. We neutralize it. And light also allows things to grow. So from both of these spiritual universities, my addiction and my disease and my children's disease, I've learned things like that. Acceptance and transcendence and embracement and transformation. I've learned about oneness, that as I become healthy around my disease, the whole family grows. As my wife and I dealt with, accepted, and embraced the fact that my child had a disability, then we changed, the whole network of the family rose. So I learned about oneness, learned about staying in the moment, learned about gratitude.
All your big life lessons.
Yeah.
Yeah.
In fact, when during the last 6 months of my son's life, he had a quote from A Course in Miracles that said, "What used to be a curse, an affliction without a cure, has been transformed into a universal blessing." And even though he died, he was a blessing in the lives around him. We had a memorial service for him, and he loved tie-dye, and the requirement was everybody had to wear tie-dye.
To the memorial?
Yeah.
Wow.
And so it was nearly standing room only at the church, and one of the most uplifting services we've had. It was a celebration. And we had parties before he died. We knew he was dying. He had to give us 3 months' notice. It's like, "You're dying? We'll bring over some pizza. Let's have a party."
Wow.
That's what happened.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.